By 13 July, the Russians had taken Vilnius and Pinsk and had reached the outskirts of Kovno and Grodno. They were within 100 miles of the German frontier, and there was a very real danger of their breaking through into East Prussia as a result of their victory and our absence of reserves. This was the moment chosen by Marshal Konev to launch a new offensive in Galicia. Welcome to Season 4 of Beyond Barbarossa, the first English-language podcast in the world to focus on the whole Eastern Front of World War II. I'm Scott Burry, back in the Redbeard studio on traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg Algonquin people, also called Ottawa, in the free, independent, and sovereign country of Canada. And I'm joined today by my two stalwart assistants, Daisy the Danger Doodle and Ragnar the Magnificent. He's a ragdoll cat. Before I get into the episode, and this being episode 80, I want to say thank you to new Patreon supporters, and indeed to all of you who make this podcast possible. So join me in welcoming new patrons, Laurie Minter, Stafford, Sean, Bruce, and Sydney Tobias. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And now on with the show. This is it. Episode 80, the launch of Season 4. I took a break from podcasting in July, not from the Eastern Front though. I did more research, more planning, and actually writing some chapters of my next books. Look forward to those. But as it's still summer, I understand how your memory might be a little foggy when you have to reach back to June over a month ago. After all, there are docks to sit on, beaches to swim at, barbecues to enjoy, and so much more. So, just to refresh, Season 3 ended with Operation Bagration, or Bagration. On 22nd June, the third anniversary of the launch of Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the USSR in 1941, the Red Army launched a massive assault of its own against German Army Group Center. In a matter of weeks, Operation Bagration drove the Germans completely out of Byelorussia, now called Belarus. As described in episode 78, the Eastern Front in the spring of 1944 featured a prominent and very large salient, or a bulge toward the east. Take a look at map 1 and you'll see why many called it the Byelorussian Balcony. Bagration started with a double bluff. In preparations in June, the Stavka, or Soviet High Command, ordered Red Army units to move to the southern side of that balcony. That way, the Germans would think they, the Red Army, were getting ready for an attack on the German Army Group North Ukraine. The Germans transferred divisions from the center of that bulge to reinforce that southern area, and then that tricky Red Army transferred those units again farther north to attack Army Group Center. In all, the Soviets deployed 4 fronts, or groups of armies, plus the 1st Polish Army, not affiliated with the Polish government in exile in London, but this group, the 1st Polish Army, was under Moscow's direct control. They also sent in the Red Air Force. In all, 1,600,000 people, 32,000 artillery pieces, 5,818 tanks and assault guns, and 8,000 aircraft. Those numbers are staggering. But at the same time, the Red Army moved another 1 million men and women under the Balcony in that southern sector. Just as the blow in Byelorussia was wiping out Army Group Center, the next hammer would fall in Ukraine. The diversion in the south turned out not to be such a deception after all. And while this is happening, to the north, the Red Army was pushing into the Baltic states of Estonia and Latvia and into Finland. I just want to point out, though, that all these simultaneous operations were only possible because of the USSR's strength in numbers. The Soviets just plain outnumbered the Germans and all of their allies put together. As many as 3 or 4 to 1. But before I get into July 1944, I realize we haven't been tracking the progress of the whole Second World War since June of this year. So we have some catching up to do. That means it's time for our regular feature, What Else is Happening in the War? June 6th, D-Day. 155,000 U.S., British, and Canadian troops land on Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches of Normandy, opening the second front in Europe that Stalin had demanded. Actually, this is the third European front after the USSR and Italy. And then there were allies fighting in Greece, so I guess it's the fourth front. Anyway, on with the show. 7th June. British troops liberated the town of Bayeux, known for the tapestry depicting William I's conquest of England in 1066. 9th June. The Red Army launches an offensive against Finnish troops on the Karelian Isthmus as well as in eastern Karelia, across Lake Ladoga. They would capture the city of Viipuri, now called Viborg, by 20th June. The Soviet plan was to knock Finland out of the war completely before dedicating all their efforts on occupying Eastern Europe and reaching Berlin. June 12th. U.S. Naval Air Forces bomb the Marianas Islands in preparation for invasion. 13th June. Germany launches the first V-1 flying bomb, an early cruise missile, known to the British as the Buzz Bomb. These are launched from bases along the French and Dutch coasts into the UK. Not that far, but the V-1 did not have a lot of range. 15 June. U.S. Marine and Army troops land on Saipan in the Marianas Islands chain in the Pacific. 17 June. Free French troops land on the island of Elba in the Mediterranean off the west coast of Tuscany, Italy. They liberate it completely by the next day, the same day that the Allies capture Assisi. 19 June. The Battle of the Philippine Sea begins, the last of 5 carrier versus carrier battles in the Pacific War between the U.S. and Japan. Because over 200 Japanese planes were shot down, compared to 29 American, the Americans nicknamed the engagement the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. As well as those planes, the Japanese also lost 9 aircraft carriers, 51 ships, and 24 submarines. 20th June. British forces liberate Perugia, Italy, and troops from Britain and the Commonwealth liberate Imphal on the Burmese-Indian border. 22nd June. The beginning of Operation Bagration, or Bagration, as described in episode 78, as well as the end of the Battle of Kohima in Burma in a British victory. 25th June. The largest battle ever fought in Nordic countries begins, the Battle of Tali-Ihantala between the USSR and Finland. As they had before, the Finns prevented the Red Army from making significant advances. As a result, by 10th July, the Soviets went to a defensive posture in Finland and transferred significant numbers of their units south to the Baltic fronts. 26 June, U.S. troops liberate Cherbourg in Normandy. July 3rd, as mentioned in episode 78, the Red Army captures Minsk, Byelorussia. The Free French liberate Siena, Italy, and in Normandy, the Allies get bogged down among German defenses in the hedgerows because of the extensive agricultural development and hedges in the area of Normandy. It's very difficult for tanks and other forces to move around. 9th July, British troops overcome heavy German resistance to liberate Caen, Normandy. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the U.S. declares Saipan liberated. The Japanese have lost over 30,000 troops on that island. 11th July, U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt announces he will run for a 4th term, something no other U.S. president before or since has done. 13th July, the Red Army takes Vilnius, then in Poland, but now the capital of Lithuania. And that's where we'll begin this episode, with the beginning of the second part of the Red Army's double bluff. Look at map 1 on the website for this episode as well as in the show notes for this episode. You can see the Byelorussian Balcony, that big salient or bulge in Byelorussia sticking out to the east. Hering Heinz Guderian, in summer 1944 the acting chief of the German Army General Staff, described the situation on the Eastern Front this way. By 13 July, the Russians had taken Vilnius and Pinsk and had reached the outskirts of Kovno and Grodno. They were within 100 miles of the German frontier, and there was a very real danger of their breaking through into East Prussia as a result of their victory and our absence of reserves. This was the moment chosen by Marshal Konev to launch a new offensive in Galicia. End quote. From Anthony Tucker Jones' book, Stalin's Revenge, Operation Bagration and the Annihilation of Army Group Center. Following Bagration, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Byelorussian fronts continued north toward the Gulf of Riga on the Baltic Sea in an attempt to trap the German Army Group North in Latvia and Estonia. Success in that operation would bring the Red Army fronts under Alexander Vasilevsky up to the border of East Prussia, which was, as we heard, Guderian's big fear, because that would be German soil, not Baltic, not Polish, not Belarusian. Vasilevsky and Georgy Zhukov, Stalin's right hand and the most famous of the Soviet generals during the war, these two advocated for moving reinforcements to strengthen this advance even more, because they believed that the Germans would resist fanatically against any push into German soil. But Stalin put them off. He insisted on taking Lviv, the remainder of Ukraine, and moving into Poland first. So that's what we're focusing on today. Can't argue with Stalin, after all. We'll get to the Baltics next episode. Now let's look at the continuation of the Lvov-Sandomierz Operation. The players. As mentioned, as Bagration raged on, Stavka started concentrating units from Ivan Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front against Army Group North Ukraine, south of Byelorussia. According to Anthony Tucker Jones' book Stalin's Revenge, Operation Bagration and the Annihilation of Army Group Center, this concentration comprised, quote, 7 tank corps, 3 mechanized corps, 6 cavalry divisions, and 72 rifle divisions, numbering over 1 million men, equipped with 1,600 to 2,200 tanks and assault guns, 14,000 guns and mortars, and 2,806 combat aircraft from General S.A. Krasovsky's 2nd Air Army. End quote. In total, more than 1 million 2,200 troops. Their morale was extremely high. After all, the soldiers of the First Ukrainian Front under Marshal Ivan Konev had just finished driving the Germans out of almost all of Ukraine and Crimea, and they knew their comrades were destroying the Germans to their north. German Army Group North Ukraine was at this point commanded by General Oberst Josef Harpe, who replaced Walter Model on 28 June 1944. Remember, when the Germans realized that the Soviets were about to launch a major offensive in Byelorussia, they transferred 6 divisions from Army Group North Ukraine, that's Harpe's or Model's group, north to Army Group Center. This transfer included 3 panzer divisions, leaving Harpe with 2 panzer armies, the 1st and the 4th, but among them, they only had 420 tanks, self-propelled anti-tank guns, and other armored vehicles. In all, 400,000 men, plus 700 planes of the Luftflotte 4, plus another 300 to 400 from Luftflotte 6. Harpe also commanded 255,000 soldiers in the Hungarian First Army. Remember, this is against more than 1 million Red Army soldiers and officers, and 2,000 tanks and assault guns, and over 2,000 combat aircraft. So they're outnumbered, depending on which side of it you're looking at, from 3 to 4 to 1. Now it's time to get into the operation itself. But first, let's take a short break.
As Scott elegantly describes in each episode of Beyond Barbarossa, the war on the Eastern Front was truly gargantuan, both in terms of its geography and its destructiveness. But given that there is so much territory to cover, and that so many millions of men were involved in the fighting, it's perhaps inevitable that some battles from the Eastern Front get overlooked. I'm David Sumner, and I'm the host of Europe at War, a weekly podcast exploring lesser-known battles and stories of the Second World War with a particular focus on the Eastern Front. From the drama of thousands of trapped German soldiers and terrified civilians attempting to break out of the Halbe pocket, to the unexpected and blistering counterattack launched by German forces on the Red Army during the Battle of Bautzen. Many of the Eastern Front's most dramatic battles, particularly those which happened towards the end of the war, have long been neglected by historians, and their stories have remained untold until now. So to hear these incredible tales from the Eastern Front and more, check out Europe at War, available on all podcast platforms. Thank you. Now let's get back to the show.
Hi, Scott here. I hope you're enjoying this episode and that you get a lot out of the whole podcast. If you do like it and you want to help me keep it going, please give it a rating or a review on Apple, Google, Amazon, Podbean, or whatever podcasting platform you listen to it on. That helps let other people know about it. Patreon's another way you can support the podcast, my research, and podcasting expenses. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/beyondbarbarossa and sign up at whatever level of support you choose. Patreon supporters get early, ad-free access to new episodes, as well as exclusive bonus episodes on topics like the Winter War between the USSR and Finland and the pre-Barbarossa invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939. Check it out, won't you? Just go to patreon.com/beyondbarbarossa. Thanks.
Did you know that the cappuccino was invented by a Ukrainian? Or that many first names, like Philip and Agatha, were brought to Western Europe by Ukrainian princesses? Or that a Ukrainian was the first female given the rank of officer in a modern army? Well, if you didn't, and even if you did, you can learn more on my podcast, Wandering the Edge, a podcast about Ukrainian history with a spot of travel, and all in English. And if you like Beyond Barbarossa as much as I do, because, well, it makes my life a whole lot easier since I don't have to do any episodes deep diving into the Eastern Front of the Second World War, please take a listen to Wandering the Edge for a deep dive into Ukrainian history, culture, and traditions. Find out more on wanderingtheedge.net. And now let's get back to Scott exploring and explaining the Eastern Front of the Second World War.
Welcome to part 2 of episode 80, the beginning of season 4 of Beyond Barbarossa, the first English language podcast in the world to tell the whole story of the Eastern Front of World War II. As you know, we're diving into the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive of July 1944. As described before the break, while Operation Bagration was wiping out German Army Group Center of Byelorussia, south of Byelorussia in northwestern Ukraine were over 650,000 Axis troops with 400 tanks and maybe 500 aircraft in northwestern Ukraine. Ready to pounce on them are over 1 million Red Army soldiers with 2,000 tanks, 14,000 guns and mortars, and nearly 3,000 aircraft. Konev's plan was to have the 1st Ukrainian front attack along 2 axes into the little corner of northwest Ukraine that they did not already control. The 3rd Guards, 1st Guards Tank, and 13th Armies struck northward toward the town of Rybalko and ultimately Lublin, Poland. Meanwhile, the 60th, 38th, 3rd Guards Tank Army, and 4th Tank Army struck due west toward Lvov, now correctly known as Lviv. Quote, Lvov was of great importance to Hitler as a nodal point between his forces in Poland and those in Romania. It also provided the shortest route to the upper Vistula, particularly the Silesian industrial region, and it protected the Polish oil fields in the region of Bereslav and Drohobych. The Lvov region was ideal for defense, being shielded by the tributaries of the Dniester, the surrounding geography of high ground divided by parallel positions. However, the key tributaries were not considerable obstacles. The Zlata Lipa and Grila Lipa could be outflanked to the north by advancing along the Dubno-Brody-Busk-Lvov highway. The region between Brody and Zolochev has a series of heights that the Germans had fortified with a system of trenches, pillboxes, and minefields. German troops were entrenched east of the Western Bug and everywhere between Brody and Vladimir Volinsk. However, Harpe's command had created 3 main defensive belts that were 19 miles or 30 kilometers deep. In addition, Vladimir Volinsk, Brody, Zolochev, Rovoviskaya, and Stanislav had been turned into strong points. The 3rd Panzer Corps was deployed from Lvov to Brody to the northeast, which was expected to be the main Soviet line of attack. The area east of Lviv, the sector where the main attack thrust was expected, was mined with 160,000 anti-personnel and 200,000 anti-tank mines. End quote from Anthony Tucker Jones, Stalin's Revenge. In support to the south, the 1st Guards and 18th Armies, with the 5th Guards Tank Army following up, were to attack the Hungarian 1st Army guarding the approaches to Stanislav. So that was a protective force for the main attack north and west to Rovoviskaya and Lvov. Before starting the attack, Konev assembled his forces secretly. Remember, they were operating a double bluff. While Rokossovsky and the other generals are smashing Army Group Center, Konev moved his forces into position at night, staying under forest cover and camouflage during the day. At this point, the Luftwaffe had few reconnaissance planes, and they were loath to fly them because the Red Air Force dominated the skies. They controlled the skies in this region by this time. Konev made it appear, though, that the main thrust, he did deploy this maskirovka, this deception tactic. He had built hundreds of dummy tanks and guns and field kitchens and other models of a moving army, deployed them so that it would look like he was going to attack towards Stanislav. On the 11th of July, the Germans finally figured out that the 30th Army was not moving towards Stanislav, but was right in front of them, poised to attack toward Lviv. The realization did not do them much good. Konev had concentrated his forces into a front only 26 kilometers across. By 13th July, there were 240 guns and mortars assembled per kilometer of front. The next day, 14 July, dawned with the Red Army's customary heavy artillery bombardment. Then the 3rd Guards Army struck north of Lviv toward Rybalko, which is today near the Polish border and on the road to Lublin, Poland. Quote, Soviet resources staggered German General Friedrich von Mellenthin, who recorded, at 0820 on 14 July, the great onslaught began. The Red Army employed masses of material on a scale never known before. In particular, they flung thousands of aircraft and for the first time in the war enjoyed unquestioned command of the air. The preliminary bombardment lasted an hour but was very violent. It was followed by concentrated attacks in 2 sectors. By 0930, it was clear that 2 of our infantry divisions had been hit very heavily and would be incapable of mastering the situation on their own. So we asked for the 1st and 8th Panzer Divisions to counterattack. End quote. The 13th Army broke through the German lines at Kharkiv, penetrating 20 kilometers in the first day. In 2 days, they were close to the town of Brody. Another breakthrough farther south left the German 13th Corps exposed in a salient. The Germans were just too weak to repulse the Red Army. The Reds just had too many more men, tanks, guns, and aircraft. And remember, the whole Army Group North Ukraine had less than half the army compared to the Soviets. West of Brody, the 1st and 8th Panzer Divisions with the SS Galician Division tried to counterattack. The Red Air Force dropped over 17,000 bombs on the 8th Panzer Division, knocking them out of the rest of the action. But the Galicia infantry fought well. So Konev sent in the 3rd Guards Tank Army under Lieutenant General Pavel Rybalko of the Battle of Kursk fame. They went through a dangerous narrow corridor, braving and suffering from constant German bombardment. The Galicia Division joined the 13th Army Corps in a counterattack here, but the Red Army surrounded them in the Brody Cauldron on 18 July. 45,000 men were trapped. Harpe, commander of Army Group North Ukraine, ordered his forces to withdraw, abandoning the 13th Army Corps, including the Galicia Division. They tried to break out more than once, but the 1st Ukrainian Front repulsed them easily. Now, a word about the Galicia Division. These were Ukrainians who joined the Germans starting in 1943 in hopes of acquiring skills, experience, and weapons to later establish a Ukraine independent of the USSR and Russia. These men were not Nazis. Indeed, although they were attached to the Waffen-SS, they were still regarded by the Nazis as subhuman. Professor Lubomir Luchuk, who appeared on this podcast a year ago, explained how these men did not subscribe to the Nazi ideology, but were Ukrainian patriots who did not want to return to Soviet Russian rule. And I can't argue with them on that score. On 22nd July, the Red Army attacked the Cauldron, splitting it in 2, as they had done so many times before. About 15,000 Germans managed to get out and return to German lines, including 3,500 out of the original 11,000 in the Galicia Division. On 26 July, less than 2 weeks after the launch of the operation, the 1st Ukrainian Front captured Lviv. To quote from Antony Beevor's The Second World War, after smashing through weakly held German lines, Konev's formations advanced to encircle Lvov. Their assault on the city was helped by 3,000 men of the Polish Home Army, led by Colonel Władysław Filipkowski. But as soon as the city had been seized, the NKVD, which had already secured Gestapo headquarters and its files, arrested the Polish Home Army officers and forced the soldiers to join the Communist First Polish Army. End quote. Proving the point of the Ukrainians in the Galicia Division. With the capture of Lviv and the surrounding area, the USSR had completed its reconquest of Ukraine, and more, up to the current borders established after the war, which are some 50 miles west of the pre-war borders. With this victory, Soviet attention shifted farther west. Stavka, the Soviet High Command, ordered Konev and his 1st Ukrainian Front to attack across the Vistula River for the city of Sandomierz in southern Poland. At the same time in the north, they were working on recapturing and reoccupying the Baltic states. But we'll get to that next episode. With the Lvov-Sandomierz Operation, this was the 6th of Stalin's 10 blows against Germany in 1944. So far, these blows had driven the Germans out of all of Ukraine, lifted the siege of Leningrad, knocked Finland out of the war, and destroyed German Army Group Center, and severely damaged Army Groups North and North Ukraine. In the Lviv-Sandomierz offensive, the Germans suffered over 136,000 casualties, including 55,000 killed, missing, and captured. In addition, the Hungarian forces lost 30,000 killed, missing, and wounded. While I said it was a victory, the Lviv operation was a costly one for the Red Army. Quote, Bagration cost the Red Army 178,000 casualties, and during the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive, it suffered a further 198,000 casualties. Stalin viewed this as a small price to pay for the annihilation of Army Group Center and the mauling of Army Groups North and North Ukraine. End quote. And that's enough for this episode. So come back in 2 weeks for the next episode where we finish off the move toward Sandomierz, as well as looking at what the Soviets and the Germans are doing farther north in Finland and Estonia. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Barbarossa, the opening of Season 4, and I hope you'll stick around for the rest of the season. It's going to be wild. There's a lot of happening. As always, I put some maps and photos on the webpage for this episode and in the show notes, so you can take a look at that. Just go to beyondbarbarossa.ca or beyondbarbarossa.podbean.com. You can also listen to the episode on the web and at my own website, writtenword.ca. Just click on the podcast button in the banner. I want to thank you all for listening, and to especially thank all who support the podcast through Patreon. It makes a big difference. If you like this episode, please consider following Beyond Barbarossa on your preferred podcasting app. And if you have a minute, I'd really appreciate a rating on whatever podcasting platform you listen on. Putting a rating or a review really helps spread the word about this podcast. If you find I've made an error or you have a comment or a question, please reach out. My email is scott@beyondbarbarossa.ca. There's also a Facebook Beyond Barbarossa page, and you can find me, Scott the Writer, at Blue Sky. Original music was composed and recorded by Nicholas Bury, and I want to send a special shout out to Thane Brown for the Morse code signal. If you can figure out what it's actually typing out, put that in an email or a message, and we'll give a prize to a random correct answer. I'm Scott Bury. Until next time, keep your paddles in the water. Slava Ukraina et viva le Canada.